Fun Day Sunday. Let's go. Let's go. Fun Day Sunday. Let's do it. All right.
Doobie-doobie-doo. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Sunday, guys. I hope you're having a great weekend so far. Welcome back. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays and Fridays, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. And welcome back, guys. I hope you are ready to get comfy and cozy. We have some interesting stories to discuss today. But first and foremost, I want to go ahead and give shout outs to people in the chat. What's going on? Shout out to JB says, hello, everybody. Forehead kisses. Shout out to Joe says, hi, perfect people. Greetings, Dan says, just found Sabby Sabs. Welcome. How did you find me, Dan? I'm always curious to know. What's going on? Hannah says, thanks for discussing Hawaii Sabby. Yeah, we're going to get into that tonight. Like, if you haven't been paying attention, what's been happening in Hawaii right now is crazy. And I'm hoping that more people give attention to this. Shout out to Wesley said, sure, a lot of speculation on sinister origins of these fires. Yeah, there's a lot of that going around. Shout out to Lawrence, who's a Sabby member, says 7 minutes until have a little tea with Sabby. Shout out to Mark, says AOC says, let them eat sunscreen. I saw that. And I was like, I didn't even want to talk about that like on a live stream. Like, I think you guys know that AOC is more focused on making herself a brand than she is trying to get things done. So I didn't even want to dive in. Shout out to Lorez says, happy Sunday, Sabrina, Eric, and Sabby fam. Smash the like. Another 24 billion for the MIC. Oops. I mean, Ukraine, of course. Thank you for covering the fires. They seem very suspicious. We're going to get into all of that. Shout out to Outside Steeler fan says, hey, all. Greetings, Terry says, hello, Sabby and chat. Shout out to Ann. I was at the JB show and now I'm at the Sabby show. Best Sunday ever. Greetings, Notori sends fire and love. Shout out to Eric, who's a Sabby member, says, hey, hi, Saturday peeps. Greetings, Simone says hello. Shout out to Lawrence, who's a Sabby member, says hello to Eric and Notori. Greetings, Danny says, hey to Notori. Notori, you're popular today. Shout out to Lana, says hi all, happy Sunday. Greetings, pitchforks are coming. Who's a Sabby member, says hello peeps. Greetings, Jay says happy Sunday, everyone. Shout out to Sebastian says, hey. Greetings, Miguel says, peace. What's going on, Ravina? Who's a Sabby member, says, doobie-doobie-doo. I made it at the very beginning of the song. Yay. Shout out to Miguel says, good morning, Sunday morning. Oh, where are you? It's 5 p.m. where I'm at. Greetings, Nikki's World says, hello, everyone. Shout out to Nelson says, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, everyone. That's right. Go ahead and hit that like button, guys. That helps me out with the algo. And shout out to RIP George says, hi, Sabby. Greetings, Rondo says, peace, peace, peace. And shout out to Delthea, who's a Sabby member, says, hello, love y'all much. Let's go ahead and dive right in, guys. We have a lot to discuss. Quick and foremost, I want to go ahead and give a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. Goes a long way around here. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters, Sabbies, and of course, members. All of their names are listed here, and you can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And I want to give a special shout out to a new Sabby patron. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's go ahead and give it up for John Graziano. Thank you guys so much. And welcome all. We are about to do the damn thing. So, what are we discussing today? Interesting topics for Sunday. Sunday, I tend to try to do something a little bit more upbeat, but crazy things have been happening recently, obviously. So we're going to go ahead and share that thumbnail. Lots to discuss. Lots to discuss. All right. Tonight, we are discussing Russell Brand and Vivek Ramaswamy. Interesting discussion there. If you are not familiar with Vivek Ramaswamy, you will become familiar with him tonight, just because I feel like he's starting to get more attention now, but this is someone that we actually should keep our eye on in reference to the GOP's primary race. We're also going to discuss RFK Jr. nails Joe Biden on inflation. We're going to get into that story, as well as an update that RFK Jr. gave people during that Iowa appearance that concerns Max Blumenthal. So I think you're going to want to hear that as well. We're also going to discuss $24 billion to Ukraine. And that is also going to tie into that story right after that, which is Hawaii on fire. We have a lot to discuss tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Saul. Hola, Sabby. Hola, Saul. Thank you so much for that. And speaking of hola, let's go ahead and get into this story about the fires in Hawaii. So I don't know if everyone's been paying attention, but it was just like a week or two ago, I covered the fires that were happening in Greece. And now we have these wildfires in Hawaii. And I do feel like, I'm glad the mainstream media is talking about it, but I feel like this kind of flew under the radar for some, and it's not getting as much attention as it should, especially when we talk about funding and where money should go and where it's going. Some people are speculating that these fires are due to the hurricane that recently happened. So there was a hurricane called Dora. Some are speculating that that is actually what contributed to the wildfires because of the harsh winds. You know, the faster the winds, the harsher the winds. That obviously isn't going to help a fire. That's going to make it worse. Some are saying that. Some people are speculating that these fires were arson. There's been speculation about that as well. But regardless of what caused the fires, people in Hawaii need help. And I have to sit back and ask myself, what is our government doing at this point in time to rapidly help people in Hawaii? I want you to think about that as we get into this story. We're going to start off first with this clip here from CNN. When they first start to realize that the fires in Maui were starting to overwhelm hospitals because of all the burn patients. So let's go ahead and get in here.
State of emergency in Hawaii. New video shows wildfires moving quickly across western Maui. Hurricane-charged winds are making it nearly impossible to battle at least 5 separate fires, including one that did move through a Maui neighborhood. 911 service and cell service has gone down in parts of that island. Officials describe a dire situation as hospitals are overwhelmed with patients suffering burns and smoke injuries. Now, Kate spoke to a man who shot video of a fire encroaching on his West Maui town. He described it as a wall of fire engulfing buildings on both sides of the street. He said he does not expect his homes to survive.
One of my houses definitely caught fire. The other houses are each a block away, and I did not see them burn, but I recognize there is a very good chance that they are not there anymore. Both of them were completely covered in smoke. After I started to evacuate, I went back to just check to see if the house was on fire or not. It wasn't, but I was standing at the street looking at my house, and I couldn't see my whole house because of the smoke. But the smoke was coming from another property that was a few buildings away. And then I went down to Front Street right after that and wanted to check on my gallery. I've had a gallery in the center of Front Street for 23 years. And as I began walking that way, there's a historic building on Front Street in Dickinson, the old Baldwin House. The roof was on fire, and I started taking a video of it because I was amazed that there were no fire trucks there.
So I want to go ahead and jump in here. Did you notice that he said one of my houses, meaning the person that's speaking has multiple homes in Hawaii? Hawaii is one of the most expensive states to live in the United States. I don't know anyone that can afford to buy one home in Hawaii, let alone two houses. But something I want to explain here in reference to these fires, we have to remember that Hawaii is an island. Hawaii is not easy to vacate. So, for example, if there was a massive fire here in Massachusetts, depending on where that fire is located, I could get in my car and I could drive to Connecticut, or I could drive to New Hampshire or Maine to get away from it. Unfortunately, for people who live in Hawaii, it doesn't really work that way. If there are wildfires spreading across the island, you can't just get in your car and drive off to another state. So you have to get into a plane and fly off the island. Now, one of the questions that people have brought up is, why did it take so long for people to get out? And we're going to get into that in just a second. We're going to explain what happened in reference to the emergency alarm and why people were not notified and given enough time to try to get away or vacate. But that is something that you have to remember, that people in Hawaii cannot just flee the way that those of us can that live in these states that are more landlocked, and we have an out. So that's just something to think about. Let's continue.
And then as I turned and looked down Front Street exploded in flame.
Just remarkable pictures there. And earlier, we also spoke with a Hawaiian official who told us that these fires are not at all under control. CNN's Derek Van Dam, you can see him. He is with us now. Derek, not at all under control. What hope is there to turn the corner against these fires?
Well, we've got a tough 12 hours ahead. My producers and I just checked on the current conditions on Maui. Winds are gusting to 66 miles per hour within the past hour. So clearly still funneling and fueling some of these flames. So what you're looking at, and the video you saw directly before me, is from Lahaina on the western side of Maui. You got to understand that this is the economic hub of Maui. This is where residents go. This is where tourists or residents live. This is where tourists go to vacation. With 20% of the island without power, this is a significant event for the island of Maui. And it's not just Maui, it's also Hawaii. We've learned just in the past couple of hours, emergency declarations being issued by the Lieutenant Governor of Hawaii for the Big Island from that burn scar you start to see, or this hot spot you see on this satellite imagery. Also interesting to
Did you guys notice the little bit of capitalism that he brought into this conversation? Let's go back a little bit. This part was interesting to me. How he brought it all back to capital instead of the people. Listen.
Hub of Maui. This is where residents go. This is where tourists or residents live. This is where tourists go to vacation.
This is where tourists go to vacation. I don't think that should be your top concern right now. You see how he's bringing back the capitalist mindset in reference to this disaster that's happening? Oh no, tourists cannot vacation in Maui. This means a loss of capital. I would not even have said that. If I was him, I would never have mentioned that. It's just, we have to save the people, period. Only CNN.
You know, with 20% of the island without power, this is a significant event for the island of Maui. And it's not just Maui, it's also Hawaii. We've learned just in the past couple of hours, emergency declarations being issued by the Lieutenant Governor of Hawaii for the Big Island. From that burn scar you start to see, or this hot spot you see on this satellite imagery. Also interesting to note, you can see the direction of the smoke just pushing the wildfire smoke away from Maui and into the open ocean of the Pacific Ocean. This is showing you just how strong the winds actually are. So what's taking place here? Why are we getting these strong winds over the Hawaiian Islands? It's all thanks to this kind of pressure squeeze between the high pressure to the north and a passing hurricane to the south. That's Hurricane Dora, and it's putting the squeeze on the Hawaiian Islands. And what that's doing is creating wind gusts in excess of 80 miles per hour. That's equivalent to a Category 1 Atlantic hurricane. Wind advisories and red flag warnings are in place for the entire Hawaiian Island chain. And
we have to pause here in reference to the Category 1 hurricane. I've lived down south. I lived in North Carolina. I lived in South Carolina. I lived in Georgia. Obviously, I live in Massachusetts now. But needless to say, I have been through a lot of hurricanes. I've been through Category 1. I've been through Category 4s and Category 5s. And I just there's something I got to say here. Something I got to say. A Category 1, that's the weakest of the weak. To me, a Category 1 hurricane is nothing for those of us that lived in those areas and we're used to the stronger hurricanes. So this is where some people start to push back when they say it's because of the hurricane. The wind speed and the wind gusts that you have from a Category 1 hurricane usually don't do that type of damage. So how did those fires start? You don't have to tell me. I've been through them all. I went through Hurricane Floyd, Hurricane Hugo. These are storms that wrecked parts of the coast, particularly down south. But I have difficulty believing that a Category 1 hurricane started these fires. Let's continue.
Similar to what we experienced in Southern California with Santa Ana winds, we are having this wind come up and over mountaintops. Very simple thermodynamic processes at play here. As that wind rushes over the mountains and through the canyons, it dries out, it heats up, and it also increases the wind. So until this hurricane and this high pressure move away from the Hawaiian Islands, we will see these winds, these very dry, hot winds that create these timberbox conditions continue.
Okay. So Hawaii is one of those states that oftentimes is forgotten about because it is an island, right? It actually took a while for mainstream media, I feel, to actually report this story in such a way that really explained to the American people the amount of devastation that was happening to people in that state. And it was only recently, and I'm going to pull this up, that they were able to admit that there were over 1,000 people that were missing as part of the death toll, and that they expected the death toll to climb. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and play this clip here because when they first started mentioning these fires, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, there's fires burning in Hawaii. And I do feel like a lot of times it's just overlooked. Hawaii is one of those ones that's overlooked. People just see it as like this vacation spot that people go to, and some people become permanent vacationers. And then also you have to remember the indigenous people that are from Hawaii. A lot of times they're often forgotten about as well. Until it got to the point, and highly thank you to TikTok and to other social media platforms that gave us the opportunity to actually hear from people who were there about what was really happening there and happening to the people. And it seemed to be still no sense of urgency demanded from the U.S. government. Not when it comes to helping our own people. But here is Live Now Fox admitting that over 1,000 people were missing. Listen to this.
As always, we want to continue our coverage right now and go out to Fox Weather's Max Gordon, who has been doing such a great job of giving us updates on this wildfire. He is in Maui right now and has the latest. Max.
Hey, good morning to you. Well, right now we're about 13 miles away from the town of Lahaina. That was the town that essentially burned to the ground during one of these wildfires. We're at a roadblock right here. They're letting the residents in at this time, but they are restricting access to some areas. There is still active search and rescue operations going on, an active firefight going on in other areas, and unfortunately, they still are finding victims in this fire. 55 people confirmed dead at this time. Some people were in local hospitals, burn victims, but right now it is in many ways a recovery operation trying to find the folks who are still remain missing. Now, there are multiple fires burning throughout the island of Maui right now. None of them are fully contained, but really the worst of these fires was the one that burned through the town of Lahaina. Now, that fire just went block by block, incinerating homes, businesses, burning all the way to the ocean. It was fueled by very dry conditions as well as strong winds caused in part by Hurricane Dora as it passed a couple of 100 miles south of the Hawaiian Islands. It was a tough go for firefighters, just trying to save what they could. The firefighting force here on Maui isn't very large, and they aren't necessarily used to large-scale fires like this. And unfortunately, this has had deadly consequences. Seeing the town of Lahaina just absolutely devastated. It's been tough on a lot of people here. Take a listen to the state's governor on what he's seen.
Let's pause here for just a second. An entire town wiped out, gone. An entire town. And what are you hearing from the Biden administration? You're hearing demands to send $24 billion to Ukraine. Not taking care of home base first. Where is the push from all these people, the congressmen? Where are all the people? Where's AOC? She's out here trying to sell sunscreen. Even if you are not in one of the towns that was actually where the fires were, you're still breathing. This is an island. You're still breathing in the air. So you're breathing in the smoke. What is going to happen to the health of the people that still live in Hawaii after this is all over with? Breathing in all that smoke when we don't have health care for everyone in this country. What's going to happen to those people? Are they going to end up with medical conditions 5-10 years from now? Let's listen to the governor.
And while we have to respect what the chief of police had to say, there will be active recovery over the coming days and weeks of the bones of those who have been lost. So it will take time. To get perspective, it is going to take many years to rebuild Lahaina. When you see the full extent of the destruction of Lahaina, it will shock you. It does appear like a bomb and fire went off, if I may.
Yeah, just absolutely awful images coming out of Lahaina. Now, making matters even more difficult, cell towers and phone lines were burned up in this fire, and communication on the west side of Maui is very difficult right now. A lot of people actually are unable to get in contact with loved ones, with friends, and more than 1,000 people remain missing. Many of these people, it's feared that the worst has come. Back to you.
1,000 people remain missing. And if the cell phone towers are destroyed, how are they going to communicate with people? How do you get out of that?
Yeah, you fear there with that 1,000 missing right now, Max, that number of deaths can really increase as the days go on there and crews continue to do the searches. How is it for people trying to track their loved ones with so much communication? It seems like we have, but you just mentioned there with the power struggles there on the island.
Yeah, it's been very difficult for folks to try to get in contact with their loved ones and their friends. Again, because the cell towers have burned down and because the phone lines have burned down, it's really tough to get phone calls in and out of that section of the island.
Yep.
And some people just simply have not been able to get in contact with those people. So officials have been starting to deploy mobile hotspots, trying to get some sort of communication into that section of the island. And hopefully many of these people will begin to come forward, emerge. There are evacuations still underway. Officials trying to get people out of that area. It's simply not safe to be there. But yeah, there's great fear that some of these people are going to be, they're going to remain missing, and unfortunately they will be added to the death count.
Where is our National Guard at this point in time? Where's the National Guard? Where is they can bring in the National Guard to disrupt protests, but you can't bring in the National Guard to save people from fires? Where's and you hit the nail right on the head, Fadi. Where are the fire trucks? Where are the helicopters? Where are our troops? $200 billion to fight Russia, not a penny to fight a fire at home. Well, Hawaii is not home, my guest. It is a resort. And this is what I was talking about. A lot of times Hawaii is forgotten about. But it's not even just Hawaii. Look at what's happening with East Palestine, Ohio. How is it that congressmen and women let Joe Biden go this long with not even criticizing the fact that he hasn't even begun to visit the people in East Palestine, Ohio, after these people have been destroyed? Now, I want you to hear this clip here from Kimber. Kimber shared this. Native Hawaiians are claiming mainstream media is greatly underreporting the number of dead. Is anybody even surprised at this point? So let's hear.
If you don't know what's going on in Maui, we are just being completely devastated right now. The last 4 days, I've been non-stop just working around the clock, trying to get supplies for people, trying to get the supplies to the people, working at the shelters. It's just, I'm safe and my family is safe and my dogs are safe. Last night they said the death toll is 80. It's not correct. They're not reporting it correctly. I don't know why they're not reporting it correctly. There's hundreds, at least 600, if not thousands of people who are dead in the streets, floating in the ocean. There's over 3,000 homes that have been burned to the ground. There's no help here on the ground. All it is residents pulling together. My whole entire truck is full of supplies right now. Just residents going to the store, going to Walmart, going to Costco, buying as much as they can, driving it straight into Lahaina. I went there last night and there was a fire that started and we got so scared we weren't able to drop off all the supplies. But there was flames that we saw and we were like, we just have to get out of here. It's so awful. The people who were able to evacuate Lahaina and get out, they're at the shelters, and the shelters are just a mess right now. They're so disorganized. We don't have anyone from any organizations helping. I think Red Cross is here, but it's just so unorganized. No one knows what we need. It's awful. And the people that are still in Lahaina that were not able to evacuate, they don't have gas in their cars. They can't leave. Some people are just holed up in their houses waiting for someone to come knock on their door and give them supplies. They don't even know supplies are being distributed at the docks in Lahaina. And it's getting so bad in Lahaina. I never thought this was going to happen, but...
And I have to pause here. I have to interrupt and I have to add this. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of Hurricane Katrina. Now, some of you watching may not have been, I don't know, born around that time, but it reminds me of the way the U.S. government delayed response to all those residents in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. When I'm seeing video footage and pictures of people standing on the rooftops of their homes so that they won't drown because of all the flooding. I remember seeing a picture of a guy standing on the roof holding up a baby, in the air, trying to let people know, you need to come rescue us. I remember seeing celebrities go to help people in New Orleans before the president even stepped 1 foot there or even sent in the National Guard. Those people were abandoned. And when I look at what's happening to people in Hawaii in reference to these fires, I feel like the same thing is happening again, where our government is abandoning these people. That's twice this year where there have been 2 incidents where the U.S. government The presidential administration has chosen to abandon the American people and has chosen to seek to help people abroad first. Because you see, it's more important for the Biden administration to make sure that they help people in Ukraine before they help people right here in this country. And some people may hear that and you may feel like I'm being cruel. No, I'm calling it what it is. You take care of home base first. And these people have been neglected. How many times it needs to happen? You have a Democrat administration where the American people have been neglected. And under Hurricane Katrina, you had a Republican administration where the people were abandoned. So you see what I'm saying? Both parties neglect the people, especially when it doesn't make them money. It costs money. Let's let her continue.
There's people going into like other people's homes trying to steal their stuff, I heard that the people are being held at like gunpoint over there. I'm doing everything that I possibly can. I've literally been working nonstop the past 4 days, but it's like, where are the trained officials? We're not trained to do this. Like, this is... I haven't gotten a break, and I've just been like, I have to help. Like, I have no other option, but it's just so hard. There's still tourists that are here. Yesterday, right off the shores of Lahaina, people are dead. They're floating in the ocean. There's a tour company that brought out people to snorkel. If you have a trip here, don't come. Cancel it. There's people complaining that their weddings were ruined. Our families are dead.
That's right. For the people who are the bougie hoo-has, who are upset, they're like, I was supposed to get married in Hawaii. Now we have to change our plans. You're still alive. Whereas a lot of people there are dying. You can plan your wedding somewhere else. So get over yourself. And I've seen all of this. The people on social media complaining because like they had a vacation or a trip that was planned in Hawaii. Get over yourself. Seriously. You're just as bad as the administration. Profits over people.
If you have ever visited here, if you love any of the islands, please donate. Please, like, no news is showing how bad it really is. It's really, really bad. If you've had money to vacation here, you have $5 to send. Don't get Starbucks. Send $5. I'm taking donations on my Venmo, but if you don't want to do that, you can donate to any of the verified fundraisers, but make sure it's verified. Please spread awareness of this. Like, no one is talking about this outside of the island. Write to your Congress, your representatives. The president yesterday just asked for $13 million to aid in Ukraine, and he hasn't helped us at all.
See what I was telling you? More people are starting to see it. We need more people to call this out, you guys. We need more people to call this out. How they're neglecting the American people.
If you don't have money to donate, please, please, please just spread as much awareness as you possibly can. Try to set up donation centers wherever you live. Please, we need every single helping hand that we can possibly get. Every single dollar that we can possibly get. I don't care if you think $1 is too small. Like, send it. It will help.
And here's the thing I want people to think about. Even if you don't live in Hawaii, next time it could be you. Next time it could be your town, your city. You could be the next East Palestine, Ohio. You could be the next Hawaii, where the government abandons you. Now, one of the problems was the emergency system. And I want people to see this as to why people couldn't get out in time. Some could not. Hawaii has a robust emergency siren warning system. It sat silent during the deadly wildfires. So this piece right here is really important and the reason why they would have a robust emergency siren system is, again, because they are an island and they need to have time to vacate, to get on a plane to vacate. You can't drive off the island, right? So apparently it says Lahaina resident Cole Millington, his dog and a go bag at his side, was already behind the wheel of his truck late Tuesday afternoon when an emergency alert appeared on his phone. This wasn't really an evacuation notice for us. The real warning, he said, came from the huge plume of black smoke in the sky over Lahaina. So it goes on to say Millington and his roommates had seen enough. They fled as wildfires began to scorch large swaths of the Hawaiian island of Maui, killing at least 93 people and destroying Millington's home among hundreds of other structures. The cell phone alert was useless. We have tsunami warnings that I think should have been utilized. So many of us felt like we had absolutely no warning. Now, of course, you know, Tulsi Gabbard, former representative of Congress, Hawaii is her state. So obviously she had some things to say in reference to this ordeal.
I just want to ask you for your prayers, your aloha, and your support for the people of Hawaii right now. There is a Hurricane Dora, that's moving south of the Hawaii island chain, but the strong winds that are caused by that hurricane have caused wildfires to spread rapidly, primarily on the islands of Maui and Hawaii Island. But these winds are impacting our entire state. These wildfires are moving very quickly, destroying anything and everything in their path. It is heartbreaking, the devastation, the suffering, the total destruction that these fires are causing for these communities. When you look at the historic town of Lahaina, you look at the schools, the small businesses, the historic sites, the homes, the cars, everything is being destroyed and eaten up by these fires that are completely out of control. In some cases, the only way that people can escape these fires is to go out and actually jump in the ocean and get in the water and to swim out away from shore. Our hearts are with our first responders, with every single person in these communities, the firefighters, the National Guard that's been activated, who are working very, very hard to keep people safe and to try to put these fires out. I'll keep you posted on ways that we all can support them in their urgent time of need. But in the meantime, I ask you to join me in sending your prayers and your love, your thoughts, and your aloha during this incredibly tragic and trying time.
Please pass this message on to as many people as possible. I don't think a lot of people realize just how bad it is now in Hawaii. I feel like, again, to that young woman's point earlier, I feel like mainstream media really is not being accurate in reference to the number of people that are missing, the number of people that are died. That young woman said their bodies just floating in the water. Like, it's just, share this information with people, because our government has abandoned these people, and this is not right. Not right. And we're going to get into Ukraine in just a second. I'm going to tell you how they show you where their priorities lie. Thank you for the super chat, Ban Hammer. Would you please talk about the song Richmond, North of Richmond by Oliver Anthony? It's so good and speaks to corruption in Washington so well. Maybe I can talk about it on Tuesday. It's tricky too. I don't think I'm going to be able to play the video because it's a song and there's copyright and all that. Thank you, Perry. Actually, Hawaii is a colony and the residents are colonized. Nisi Q, just like the last bad volcanic eruption, they were breathing in fiberglass, right? And that's the thing people have to understand. When the smoke just continues, those fires continue to burn like that, you're breathing in that air that can't be healthy for your lungs. Thank you, Steve. Indigenous people don't own much land in Lahaina. They only work there. I used to live in Honolulu. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Perry. Interesting, the corporate news heads talk to themselves, not the people of Hawaii. Are they afraid of the truth? Right. Why aren't they talking to that young girl who just made that TikTok video that showed you? Right? And thank you, Apozimoski? Mossy? The American empire is collapsing and institutions are disintegrating. Like every previous empire in history, elites play pretend while society around them falls into chaos. history repeats itself. And I totally hear where you're coming from there. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip, Karim. This is intentional, just like all the wars. Pandemic, it's depopulation. You should have Richard Grove and Ryan Christian on your show. A regular fire doesn't cause that kind of damage. Told you there's a lot of different speculations about this. Very interesting. Sherry says there is something not right about these fires, Sabby. This is unprecedented by any standards, but we are sending more effing money to Ukraine. Yes, and we're going to get into that story in just a second. So yeah, once again, our government abandoning its own people. Now on to Ukraine, who our government is not abandoning, by the way. If you have not heard, President Biden is seeking $24 million to send to Ukraine. Thinking about all the billions that has gone to Ukraine over the past year and a half. This is absolutely ridiculous. And I want to be very clear here. I am not here to say that people in Ukraine should suffer. No, I feel for the people there that are having to go through all of this. I feel for the people in Russia that are having to go through all of this. But it is very important to understand that at this point in time, that they cannot win this war. And our government is showing you that they're not winning because they continue to send them money and weapons. That right there lets you know that they're losing this battle. And I'm going to show you a recent clip from CNN where they actually admit this, I think for the first time. But the American people at home are left to suffer and struggle. So we'll get into this here. Biden seeks $24 billion for Ukraine, testing bipartisan support in Congress. So here we go. President Biden asked Congress to approve about $40 billion in additional spending on Thursday, including $24 billion for Ukraine and other international needs, $4 billion related to border security, and $12 billion for disaster relief. Now, who is experiencing disaster right now? That would be like Hawaii, right? East Palestine, Ohio. Notice how disaster relief is last. Ukraine is first. And notice the difference in the dollar amount. Why is our government willing to spend more money abroad than on its own people right here? What could we have done with all the billions of dollars that have gone out the door to Ukraine? And by the way, it's not just the dollars, it's not just the weapons. When we talked about individual packages that have been sent to Ukraine over time, one of those packages also included healthcare. But they won't even give everyone in this country healthcare. One of those packages included clean drinking water, but they won't give everyone in this country clean drinking water. We have to call this out for what it is. This is just a money laundering scheme. Our government knows that Ukraine cannot win this. Their goal is to remove Vladimir Putin as leader of Russia, implementing regime change. Their goal is to support the military-industrial complex. There's a lot of money to be made here. But let's not sit here and pretend like the U.S. government really cares about the people who are suffering in Ukraine. If there was no money to be made here, this would not be happening. And more people need to call it out for what it is. A senior administration official said the needs were great, and the White House was hopeful an agreement could be reached with Congress on the request, which covers only the first quarter of the current 2024 fiscal year. But the request could face opposition in Congress, where some far-right Republicans, especially those with close ties to former President Donald Trump, want to pare back the billions in assistance and Washington has sent to Kyiv since Russian troops invaded in February 2022. Notice how they mention the opposition is coming from some far-right Republicans. Notice they don't mention that there's any opposition coming from the squad, because the squad has voted for legislation to send money to Ukraine. This should be very telling and letting you know exactly where the Democratic Party is headed. Trump, the front runner in the race to be the Republican presidential nominee in 2024, has been sharply critical of the U.S. support for Ukraine in the war. And 70 House members backed an unsuccessful proposal in July to cut funding for Ukraine. Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said there was strong bipartisan support in the Democratic-led Senate for doing more to back Ukraine, help Americans affected by natural disasters, and fight the scourge of fentanyl. Notice again, even with Chuck Schumer, Ukraine comes first, we come last. The latest request from the Biden administration shows Americans' continued commitment to helping Americans here at home and our friends abroad, and should send a clear signal to Vladimir Putin, the Chinese government, and others of America's resolve when it comes to defending democracy around the world. That's coming from Chuck Schumer. The Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said in a statement he looked forward to reviewing the request to make sure it is necessary and appropriate to keep America safe, secure our borders, support our allies, and help communities rebuild after disasters. Notice it's always after the disasters, not help them during, huh? McConnell has strongly supported assistance to Ukraine, saying that much of the money is spent in the United States and citing the importance of the democratic world unifying against aggression, whether from Russia or China. Boy, they kill me. When asked about criticisms from Republicans in the House of Representatives that the request violated a budget deal reached in June, the official said it was clear when that deal was signed that it did not preclude requests for emergency funding. There's work to do, but we are hopeful about our ability to come together. First, Ukraine requests since Republicans took House. Republicans narrowly control the House, where Speaker Kevin McCarthy signaled in June that any request for more assistance for Ukraine would face an uphill path through Congress. A spokesperson for McCarthy said he would review Biden's proposal. A Republican-led House will not rubber stamp any blank check funding requests. Rather, the administration's emergency funding requests must be reviewed and scrutinized on their merits, consistent with the practice and principles of our majority. The House and the Senate last approved aid for the Kyiv government, $48 billion in December, before Republicans took control of the House. Where is all this money going? Our Pentagon can't pass an audit. Where's the spreadsheet of how this money is spent? Why did certain Democrats vote against that? Vote against some type of accountability so that the American people, so that you could see how your tax dollars are being spent. Where is this money going? A second administration official said the United States was making good on its promise to stand by Ukraine in its fight against the Russian invasion that began in February 2022 and would not be bashful about asking for additional funds if needed. The funding request also includes $3.3 billion to expand development and infrastructure, leading by the World Bank to developing countries and provide a credible alternative to China's corrosive and unsustainable leading and infrastructure projects. World Bank, China, $3.3 billion. Why are we helping another country expand their development and their infrastructure when we have roads and bridges falling apart in our own country? Right? This is an economic issue, and the economic issue is China. The US government doesn't like how far China has come economically. They don't like the fact that China is growing beyond their control. And they really do not like the fact of the idea that there's a possibility of another superpower other than the United States. There's actually a doctrine that is against it. It's called the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which basically says that there should be no other superpower other than the US. But they're sending them money to help them build their infrastructure and development. And Hawaii's on fire. Look how long it took to rebuild New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. I want people to pay attention to what's really happening here. When they tell you they don't have money for healthcare, that's a damn lie. When they tell you they don't have money to make lunch free for kids at public schools, that's a lie. In fact, some states have already passed that. They have the money to do those things. They have the money to make sure that no one goes hungry in this country. But their money goes towards war. All the billions and billions of dollars going out the door. The request includes $13.1 billion for the Department of Defense, including $9.5 billion for equipment for Ukraine and replenishment of U.S. equipment stocks already sent to Kiev. It also includes $3.6 billion for continued military, intelligence, and other defense support. It seeks $8.5 billion for the Department of State and U.S. Agency for International Development, including $7.3 billion for economic, humanitarian, and security assistance for Ukraine and other affected countries and populations. $1 billion to strengthen strategic partnerships in developing countries. $200 million to strengthen African countries' resistance to Russia's Wagner Group. Listen to this, see? Resistance, which Washington has designated a transnational criminal organization. All this money just going out the door. $7.3 billion for humanitarian assistance. People need humanitarian assistance right here in this country. They don't have money for that, though. Among other things, the package asks for $2.65 billion for the Department of Homeland Security, including $2.2 billion for border management operations, shelter and services for migrants released from DHS custody, and $416 million for counter fentanyl activities. Let me show you something right here real quick. $2.2 billion for border management operations, shelter and services for migrants released from DHS custody. But they refuse. This money is wasted. Let me tell you why. If you're not trying to fix the core problem, which is fixing those countries that the US government destroyed, which is the reason why those people are coming here in the first place. If they're not trying to fix that, if they're not trying to give resources back to if they're not trying to give resources back to those countries, if they're not trying to give jobs back to those countries, if they're not trying to rebuild those countries that they destroyed and took everything from, this money that they're using to help the border management operations and to shelter migrants is just a Band-Aid on a wound that is going to continue to reopen. That's not going to end. People will continue to come because their countries have been destroyed by us. So that $2.2 billion will continue. That'll be a continual problem. $2.2 billion to shelter and services for migrants released from DHS custody. They have money. They're showing you they have money to pay for shelter. Are they giving you shelter? Think about it. Think about it, folks. Think about all the people you know that have been evicted. All the homeless people out in the street. People who can't afford to pay their rent, especially after the pandemic and they lost their jobs. All the people who were kicked off of unemployment under Joe Biden, by the way. Where's the $2.2 billion to help shelter people in this country? Where is it? I want to be very clear, and some people can take this the wrong way. I 100% understand why people are coming here. But something that I have noticed is that I feel like the U.S. government, the Biden administration, they're willing to help the migrant populations, not because they care about those people. Because if they cared about those people, they wouldn't continue to destroy their countries in the first place. They're willing to help shelter them because they want cheap labor. Kamala's not going to tell you that. Joe Biden's not going to tell you that. Nobody in the Democratic Party is going to tell you that and admit that to you. They want cheap labor. All of these labor strikes that have risen up around the country the past 2 years, you think they like that? No, they don't want you going on strike. Look at how they interfered with the railroad workers trying to go on strike. They realize the American people are becoming more frustrated and want a living wage and want a decent life. Now, the easy response would be just to give you a living wage, but they can't have that. Why would they do that when they can just pay people less who are willing to do the work for less? So this is a labor issue. And when people bring up the border and people talk about everybody's coming here, you make sure you bring it right back to the international perspective, and you bring it back to the fact that these people's countries have been ruined and destroyed. That's why they're coming here. Then, two, you make sure you mention why the Biden administration is willing to help them as much as they can, because they want the cheap labor. They want the people to keep cutting their lawns. All the rich people in Southern California and in San Francisco and all these bougie places across this country, they want to keep employing people to be their housekeepers, to cut their lawns and shit. They know majority of Americans, we're not doing those jobs. And if that means they have to hire you at Kellogg's, if that means that they have to hire them to work for the railroads, if that means that UPS wants to hire them instead of trying to keep the employees that they have who are asking for a raise, that's what they'll do. Got to make sure they have those nannies. If you've ever lived in New York, you could honestly go to Central Park, try to do it Monday through Friday in the afternoon, and you just see like a slew of nannies. All these rich people, all these nannies. And not all of them were legal. So think about that. Now, all that money going out the door, but majority of Americans don't approve of it. But it's still happening. And I want to show you this. Majority of Americans oppose more U.S. aid for Ukraine in war with Russia. And I'm just going to show you the numbers here. And that's it. Here we go. Overall, 55% say the U.S. Congress should not authorize additional funding to support Ukraine. versus 45% who say Congress should authorize such funding. 51% say the U.S. has already done enough to help Ukraine. 48% say it should do more. I don't know what to tell you, but it's just Americans are waking up to this. And now it has gotten to the point where even CNN's Anderson Cooper had to admit that Ukraine is losing. He has to admit it, because how else can you continue to excuse why we keep giving all this money? Eventually, you're going to have to tell people, yeah, we keep doing this because they're not winning. They're losing. First time I saw this on CNN, listen to this.
Long before Russian forces invaded, it was understood they outnumbered and outgunned Ukrainian forces. So when Ukrainian troops managed early on to roll back a good deal of that invasion force, hopes were initially high they could quickly finish the job. It's not worked out that way. And now, new reporting tonight that there's growing concern among Western allies about Ukraine's counteroffensive and its fate. In a moment, we'll talk to a retired three-star general for his take. But first, the exclusive reporting from CNN's Jim Sciutto, who joins us now. So what are you hearing from your sources about what they believe Ukraine's prospects are right now?
A markedly negative turn, Anderson, and these are sources I've been speaking to since the start of the counteroffensive, but even going back to the start of the war. And expectations of this counteroffensive were quite high, going back just a few weeks ago. But in recent weeks, as Ukrainian forces have encountered really intense Russian defenses in the east and the south, 3 lines of defensive lines, defensive belts as they're known, with trenches as you're seeing there, tens of thousands of mines, Ukrainian forces have not proven able to break through those lines. They've encountered staggering losses, I'm told, both in terms of killed in action and wounded in action.
Everybody heard that? They've suffered staggering losses, both killed in action and wounded in action. They have to report it now. They have to tell people now. Let's continue.
And Ukrainian commanders, in response to that, understandably have pulled back some of those units to save some of those casualties. And while even a few weeks ago, the hope was that over time they'd be able to break through, more recently, the assessments both on this side of the Atlantic but also in Europe have been that they don't quite see the opportunity. So that hope has faded. Not entirely faded, but it has certainly become a much less hopeful outlook for their prospects for success in gaining back significant territory.
But they knew that there was no way. They knew they didn't have a chance. They knew they didn't have a chance. Like, this is so, once again, another war that could have been avoided. Let's remember when they tried to talk about peace negotiations a while back. Could have been avoided, all because you need to feed the war machine. This is embarrassing. And it's not even one of those things cheering on one side or the other. This is just embarrassing. All this money went out the door. I wonder what the American people feel about this. Billions and billions of dollars gone out the door, and they're losing.
Also takes into account, I mean, there were a large number of Ukrainian forces trained for a length of time by U.S. forces in sort of combined weapons tactics and movement. That still has not been able to deal with the trench system, the mining, the defensive system that Russia had time to set up.
No, and what I'm hearing is that the expectations may simply have been too high. When you look at the training for some of these newly supplied Western weapons, for instance, German Leopard tanks, you're seeing maybe 8 weeks of training. That is not a lot of time. And the thinking is, from speaking to military officials, also diplomats, is that the idea of turning Ukrainian armed forces into a capable, credible, mechanized fighting unit in that short length of time may have been a bridge too far. That even with advanced Western weapons and training from the best in the business, right, that the time frame was short, and that even for the best U.S. combat brigades, months, years of training still make it difficult to break through these kinds of lines. So with weeks of training, it just may have been too high a hope.
How long before mainstream media comes forward to tell the truth about this war, like they did with the war in Iraq? Do you remember years later, after the war in Iraq started, they finally came forward and finally admitted that there were no weapons of mass destruction? That we were told a lie, we were sold a lie? How long do you think for this one? 3, 5 years? Because see, these guys are puppets. Anderson Cooper and this dude to his right, whose name I always forget, these are just puppets. Their strings are pulled by the executives at CNN. The executive strings are pulled by the shareholders like BlackRock and Vanguard. If they weren't puppets, they wouldn't be there. They're doing the bidding of the shareholders. They're telling you exactly what the shareholders want you to hear.
You also mentioned in your reporting that the Western officials fear this slow counteroffensive could cause a gap amongst Ukrainian officials. What's the concern?
Well, you're already hearing it, right? I was in Aspen for the Security Forum just a couple of weeks ago. The Ukrainian president spoke there, and at the time he said, listen, we'd like to have proceeded more quickly, but we didn't get the weapons and the training soon enough, pointing some fire, as it were, at the West for not moving quickly enough to support this counteroffensive. And you're hearing more of that. And the concern is that the unity of the alliance, both among Western partners in NATO, but also with their Ukrainian partners, that a blame game emerges, as one official described it to me. And that's a problem, right? Because unity is important, not just in terms of standing up to Russian aggression in Ukraine, but also maintaining political support, military support, etc. A lot of this is bubbling up under the surface, and the fear is that it bubbles up above the surface and creates divisions that make it more difficult to provide that support going forward.
Jim Sciutto, fascinating reporting. Thank you. And very concerning, obviously.
Notice how he basically admitted that they're blaming the West for not supplying them weapons fast enough to deal with it fast enough, when the U.S. government has been giving them weapons and money for over a year. Billions and billions of dollars. So they're starting to bite the hand that feeds them. Okay. You see how this works? You see this? Come on, man. Come on. Let me go to some of the comments here. Thank you, DC says, Joe's a good man bailing out struggling Ukrainian laundromats. Thank you. Shima says, Janet Yellen herself said that the security and military spending will be prioritized over the actual economy. There you go. Thank you, Perry. The money is being skimmed off and the guns will end up with Al-Qaeda and criminals in the U.S. Some of the weapons have ended up in countries in Africa too. And thank you, 100 BlackRock, Goldman and Sachs payouts. Thank you, DC. DHS and HHS are child trafficking organizations. I don't know about that. And thank you for the super sticker, Morgan. Thank you so much. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you. Thank you for the tip, Roger. Baltimore, Flint, and Jackson, H2O, East Palestine. The young lady wants us to donate, but how are we expected to trust 100% of our donations end up helping her? That's a good point, Roger. Hawaii's Lieutenant Governor, Sylvia Luke, who was serving as acting governor while Governor Josh Green was out of state, activated Hawaii's National Guard, and dozens of guardsmen were ordered to assist with traffic control on both Maui and the Big Island of Hawaii. Thank you, Roger. And thank you, Karim. Are people starting to see why they want to take away our guns? These political criminals don't serve the people of this nation. They serve corporate and globalist interests. Sorry. Thank you for that. Well. It is about that time we're headed into the next story. RFK Jr. has been very vocal, as you all know. Like those of you who've been watching me for a while, you know I do not support his campaign. If you didn't have a chance to do so, you'll want to see JB's show from earlier today on Revolutionary Blackout Network, where he talked about RFK Jr. flip-flopping on policing compared to what's on his website and what he said recently in an interview. So I'm not going to talk about that because JB covered that. But I am going to talk about this issue here in reference to inflation, because I do believe he is correct about the inflation issue. I've told you guys before that Joe Biden, Ro Khanna, Pramila Jayapal, AOC, all of them that have been repeat guests, I would say, on CNN and MSNBC in reference to Joe Biden's economy have been lying about what is really happening with the economy. RFK Jr. is going to point that out in a new looks like a new ad that he has. And I think he's spot on. And I'm also going to show you really quickly what the consumer prices are as of the end of July, because I want to show you the numbers so that you can see that they're all lying in reference to the economy. So let's go ahead and get into this clip here.
Both President Trump and President Biden like to boast about the prosperity that they brought to our country, but in crisscrossing America myself, I'm not seeing evidence of that prosperity. Instead, I'm seeing an America that I never thought that I'd witness. I'm seeing these giant disparities in wealth where most Americans are living on the precipice of desperation. In fact, the average income in this country is now $5,000 less than the basic cost of living. And 35% of Americans are not making enough money to pay for basic human needs. That means transportation, food, and housing. What that means is that they have to make impossible choices every day of their lives. American parents today all across our country are sitting in their living room and listening to a baby cry in the room next door and having to wonder whether that baby is $30 sick or $200 or $500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. They're choosing between medicine and food and gasoline and rent.
And I want to pause here because this is where I say, especially when he brings up the medicine issue, that's why he should support everyone having universal health care. Then people wouldn't have to sit up here and worry, oh man, do I have the money to take my kid to the ER? Do I have the money to pay the medical bill that I'm going to receive after? The emergency room is expensive. You know, am I going to be able to pay for this? Because the reality is in this country, a lot of people don't go to the doctor because they can't afford to. It's a sad reality in a country as wealthy as this. But a lot of people just don't go because they can't afford to go. So they just shrug it off. A lot of times those are the same people that go to work when they're sick because they can't afford to take that day off because they don't get sick pay. It's a recurring issue, and it's been going on for a long time. Let me go back just a little bit. Sorry.
And food and gasoline and rent. And in order to bridge that gap between their income and their needs, Americans are increasingly relying on their credit cards. We now have the greatest credit card debt in America's history.
Some of that increased, I believe, during the pandemic when people were laid off, they lost their jobs or the business that they worked for closed. There's a lot of small businesses here in Massachusetts, and even some of the popular ones in Boston closed permanently during the pandemic because they just couldn't afford to reopen because they weren't getting business for like months like that. But part of that is due to that. But credit card debt that's a doozy. Now, one thing I will say about that one, credit card debt, you can file for bankruptcy. Student loan debt, you can't. It's almost this is an inescapable burden that you just carry with you for the rest of your life until you pay it all off, if you can pay it all off. But the credit card debt, this is a big one. And this isn't the first time I've seen this happen in my adult life. I saw it happen after the 2008 housing crisis. This was also an issue where people started to use their credit cards to pay for utilities, to pay their rent, to pay for groceries, because they just weren't making the money that they needed to do so, or people lost their jobs. We talked about the housing crisis and all of that and how it's all connected. but this is the second time in my adult life where I've seen where people had to rely on their credit cards just to pay for basic necessities that they needed. So here we go again. But according to Joe Biden and Ro Khanna, everything's fine.
Now have the greatest credit card debt in America's history. Credit card debt is $300 billion more than when President Trump took his oath of office. And the average interest rate on that credit card debt is around 22%. When the mafia does that, they call it loan sharking. When banks do it, they just call it interest. If we're doing so well, then why is it today that 57% of Americans could not put their hands on $1,000 in order to pay for an emergency?
Or $500. Or $500. 50%. Because the thing is, the average American lives paycheck to paycheck. I mean, how many people do you know that actually have a savings account, one? And if they do have a savings account, they actually have money in that savings account. Not everybody does. I mean, I'm just keeping it real. Just keeping it real. So the problem that you run into is if you're one of those people where you don't have that emergency fund, if you need it, you're screwed. And it could be anything that happens. Maybe your car breaks down. And in order to get to work, you have to have your car. So then you can't get your car fixed because you don't have that emergency fund. So you might reach for the credit card. Or you just don't have credit cards and you still can't get the car fixed. So how are you going to go to work? Things happen.
And for the first time in American history, most Americans, in fact, 2/3 of us, believe that our children will be worse off than we are today. For most Americans, the American dream has turned into an American nightmare. And whatever graphs and data and statistics that government officials use to try to gaslight us into believing that everything is hunky-dory, reality is written across this country on the plywood that is boarding up all of these closed businesses from Main Street to Union Square in San Francisco, and it's etched on the faces of the mothers and fathers who gather weekly at their kitchen table to go through the bills and try to figure out how in the world they're going to make their end.
Do people still do this? You know, this is something I noticed with like older politicians. They always use this line that when you're sitting at that kitchen table looking at the bills, Kamala Harris used that line. Marianne Williamson used it. RFK Jr.'s using it. Like a lot of older politicians use that line. And I'm just kind of sitting here thinking to myself, like, when have I ever sat at a kitchen table to go through the bills? Particularly with my generation, like most of our stuff is online. So I just wonder if that's just something that they're just accustomed to saying, or maybe that's how it was like when they were growing up. That's what their parents did, or that's what they did, you know, when they were like around my age group. But I never remember sitting at a kitchen table to go through bills. That's what's funny to me. Like all this stuff is online. So I don't know. I don't know, man. It sounds like standard politician talk to me, and it kind of is weird.
Weekly at their kitchen table to go through the bills and try to figure out how in the world they're going to make their ends meet. And that kitchen table math seems a lot more reliable than the sunny economic projections that we're getting from our elected officials of both political parties in the White House. Because every American family knows in its bones that these tales of a booming economy don't add up. The last two administrations, like several of the administrations that preceded them, have continued to adopt policies that favor Wall Street and tech billionaires and military contractors over the American middle class.
Yeah, but you taking money from tech billionaires. RFK Jr. has a super PAC. See, this is the part that people need to hear. It's like, yes, call out the wealth, call out the inequality, but I think it's also important that, you know, you are attached to it too. RFK Jr. is very wealthy. That's one thing. But it's also another thing when you got a super PAC. It's not like your campaign is grassroots funded. So it's like, if you taking money from people like David Sacks, I mean, he's a tech billionaire. Let's continue. These are the kind of things people need to know. I told you guys about Bernie the other day, about where his money was going. So there you go.
That favor Wall Street and tech billionaires and military contractors over the American middle class. Those interests are strip mining America of its equity, of its wealth, of its salaries, and ultimately of our democracy. And both President Trump and President Biden are now running for re-election based upon these economic choices. And what that means is that if either of them get elected, you can expect more of the same. We seem to have plenty of money for all the bank bailouts and the foreign wars, but food stamps for ordinary Americans are being cut by 90%, and teachers across the country are paying for school supplies out of their own pocket. It's time that Americans got a president who cared about their economy and not the war economy and the bank economy.
Pause here for just a second. We're going to talk about the food stamps. Yes, I agree. Like, food stamps should not be cut. But again, I feel like none of these politicians are getting to the root issue. The core issue is, why do people have to go on food stamps in the first place? Because we have poverty and inequality in this country. So the problem that should be addressed should be fixing poverty and inequality. And then food stamps isn't even an issue. Everybody should have a right to eat. Shouldn't be a privilege to have food. Food stamps also can be shameful for some people. I remember I was at Whole Foods one day. I'll never forget this. I was at Whole Foods one day because I used to like to go there to get their fruit. I knew it was going to be fresh. I was at Whole Foods and I was standing in line, and there was a guy in line, and Whole Foods takes like SNAP now, like they take food stamps now. At least they do in Massachusetts. If they don't where you live, let me know. Okay, let me know and I can write to them. I'll write a letter, a strongly worded letter. Just kidding. But anyway, there was this guy in line, like in front of me, and he had to use food stamps. And I could tell, like, you could see the kind of embarrassment, right, that he had on his face. Kind of saying it to the cashier quietly so that everybody else in the line doesn't hear, even though we heard, like, do you take? And it's like, yeah, we do. And then I saw the people like right in front of me, and I hate this snobby little elitist shit. I live here in the Boston area. There's a lot of snobby, hoity-toity, just stuck up, I know better than you people. And the people in front of me, they looked at each other. It was a couple. They looked at each other, kind of like smirking to each other, as if they were making fun of the fact that he was using food stamps. And that made me feel some kind of way. It made me feel like, who cares? Like, why are you concerned what someone's method of payment is, and they're just trying to feed themselves? And I really did not like that. I did not feel good about that. When I left Whole Foods that day, by the way, I ain't been to Whole Foods in a while because they had a whole racial issue, but I didn't go back to Whole Foods after that anyway. But when I left Whole Foods that day, that really made me feel some type of way, as if he did not have the right to be there shopping at Whole Foods because he had to use food stamps. As if Whole Foods, the all natural, healthy foods, the organic foods, should only be for those who are not on food stamps. And believe it or not, there are a lot of people who feel that way. They feel like if you're poor, if you're working class, that you don't deserve to have organic food. But the shame that he had on his face, it made me feel some type of way. And I always felt like, why does it even have to come to that? Why do people even have to be on food stamps? Why can't we guarantee food to people in this country? If we can send billions and billions to Ukraine, we can feed people. It's a mess. There are parts in this country, even Massachusetts, by the way, like New Bedford. There are places in this country that are food deserts, meaning that they don't have a grocery store. The closest thing they have to it is like a Rite Aid or a Walgreens or a CVS, and people shop at those places for their food. There's not many healthy options there. That's this country. That's not in a third world country. That's happening right here. Something to think about, man. Sorry, I went on a rant there. The food stamp thing got to me.
Are being cut by 90%, and teachers across the country are paying for school supplies out of their own pocket. It's time that Americans got a president who cared about their economy and not the war economy and the bank economy and the finance economy and the Wall Street economy, and not the theoretical economy on the charts and graphs. Over the coming weeks, I'll be releasing an economic plan that focuses on ending this corrupt merger between state and corporate power that has made the 6 essential expenses unaffordable for most Americans. And those essential expenses are housing, food, childcare, utility bills, commuting to work, and getting the medical care that you need to survive. I want every American to know that you are not alone in this crisis. I want you to know that I'm going to be a president who's going to be thinking about solving your economic problems every day that I'm in the White House. The government created these problems, and you deserve a government that is going to solve them.
So he is expecting to release his economic plan soon. So that should be interesting. Now, to piggyback off of what he said about the economy, so I told you that Joe Biden and other Biden bros in Congress are continuing to defend Joe Biden's economy. They're calling it Bidenomics, and they're saying it's a good thing. I just want to remind you that in July, consumer prices rose by 3.2% annually in July, picking up for the first time in 13 months. So this was just recently, and I just want to read this part here. For the first time in more than 12 months, the pace of consumer price hikes accelerated on an annual basis. The consumer price index rose 3.2% for the year through July, up from June's 3% annual increase, according to the data released Thursday by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The annual headlines rate increase, which was largely due to a year-over-year comparisons to July 2022 when monthly inflation turned negative, came in below economists' expectations for a 3.3 annual gain. Prices rose 0.2% on a monthly basis, driven by shelter costs, which accounted for 90% of the increase, the BLS report said. So when they continue to tell people that, oh, everything's fine and Biden's economy is doing great, and that's a lie. I can look at my bank account and tell the difference. A lot of you probably can too. 2 years ago, how was your bank account then compared to now? How much did eggs cost at your grocery store 2 years ago? How much did bacon cost? Don't even get started with steak. If you go to the grocery store right now and you look at the price of steak, it is astronomically ridiculous. And have you also noticed that restaurants have increased their prices? Look at some of the chain restaurants, which I don't do chain as much. But if you look at some of the chain restaurants, now all of a sudden, something that you used to get from them at least maybe once a month or whatever, now all of a sudden it's increased like $2 or $3. It's very different. And there was actually a mother from Alabama who was very vocal about the American dream and where did it go. This video went viral, and I want you guys to hear what she had to say, because I think this is not a red team, blue team issue. If you're poor, you're poor. If you're rich, you're rich. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Let's be very clear. I'm glad it came from her. Let's hear what she had to say.
I am so tired of feeling helpless as a parent. Yes, my kids are grown adults. My oldest is 28, my youngest is 25. And I thought by teaching them what I learned, which is you work hard, you get a good job, you're going to get the things in life that you need, right? Worked for me. Why wouldn't it work for them? Because it doesn't. Because the world is changed, all right? And now I feel like I see them struggling. And before my generation comes at me, yes, I understand struggling is a part of life. We all struggled. But there's a difference between struggling and drowning. All right. So we struggled and it was tough. But you know what? We made it. We knew there was a light at the end of the tunnel with our struggle. It seems like kids today, no matter how much they struggle, they just get further and further down the water into the drowning point. All right. When I was their age, I was making less than $10 an hour. And I can afford to live on my own. Now you have to be making 6-figure salary to get a decent, tiny little place to live. So what the is going on, and how do we help them as parents? I told my son, all you have to do is work hard, go to college or join the military like I did. He went to college, got his degree, got a full-time job. He moved back in with me right when he graduated from college because he said, hey, Mom, as soon as I get a job, which was within 2 weeks of him getting out of college, maybe take me 2 months and I'll save up enough money for me to move out. Okay, cool. It's been 10 months. He has saved almost every dime and still can't afford to live.
Let's pause here for just a second because there's two things she mentioned that I want to focus on really quick. The part where she said, do like I did, you know, you can join the military, da-da-da. This was something that was more popular with our parents, at least my parents' generation, was to, okay, well, you can join the military or you can go to college, join the military after college. Maybe they can pay off those student loans, that type of thing. The military doesn't have that much of an appeal like it used to. That's one of the reasons why you see military recruitment is down. But not only that, everybody can't join the military. It's just a reality. But people are starting to see, at least I think a lot of millennials, Gen Z, we're starting to see the devastation that happens to people in these countries that the US military sends you to. So that's part of the reason as well. But when she says that you have to make now like a 6-figure salary just to afford a tiny place to live, I can identify with that 100%. The days of graduating from college and making like $60,000 an hour, excuse me, $60,000 a year, that doesn't do anything anymore. That's nothing. And it's like to have that same type of lifestyle, it's like, yeah, like you have to make 6 figures just to have that same type of lifestyle that you could back then. What that also means is that for a lot of us, you are not living alone. Most of us had roommates. I had roommates during college. I had roommates after college. One year, I think I lived by myself. One. But most of my adult life, I feel like I had roommates. My parents didn't have roommates. You see how things have really changed? My generation, it's almost impossible to make it without having a 2-person income. Almost impossible. How are you going to buy a house? How are you going to buy these things? And I still steadily see the housing prices increase here in Massachusetts to the point where if I were to try to buy a house today, if I would have waited, there's no way I could afford it. No way. And I did all those things. I went to college like they told me to. I even went to grad school so I can get a higher level position because they required you to have a master's degree. I was able to make more money and still can't do all those things. There's no way. There's no way. And even when we got this house, our parents helped. And that's another big difference I noticed from my generation and my parents' generation. Like when my parents moved out and were on their own, they didn't have to go back to my grandparents and ask them for help monetarily to obtain purchases. They didn't have to ask my grandparents, can you help us get this house? They didn't have to ask my grandparents, can you help us, get this, we're moving, can you help us with this move? They didn't have to do that. And they never had to return back home to live with my grandparents. Whereas more people from my generation, whether they call us boomerang kids or whatever they're calling them these days, there was this phase of graduating from undergrad, moving back home for like a year or so to save the money, like she said, get on your feet, and then keep it moving. And the problem that you'll also notice is that not everyone has parents that they can return home to. That's another problem. But everything she's saying, I identify with 100%. Let's go back in. I'll just go back a little bit.
He has saved almost every dime and still can't afford to live. Why are 1-bedroom studio apartments almost $2,000 a month? Why? Like, I just don't get it. So I don't even think that there's even classes anymore. There used to be, upper class, middle class, lower class. It's literally turning into the ultra wealthy and then everybody else is just poor.
That's right. That's what it is. That's exactly what you have now. And I'm glad she said that. And yes, we've heard like people like Bernie Sanders say that for years and stuff like that. But you need to hear it from everyday peeps. And I'm glad to hear from people who are not running for office as well. She's Alabama, one of the more cheaper states to live in. $2,000 for a studio apartment. Who comes up with these prices and why? It's crazy. Now, there's more about RFK Jr. if you're not aware. Apparently, Woody Harrelson has taken some flack for, I guess, kind of endorsing RFK Jr.'s presidential campaign by wearing a hat. I guess you can't wear a hat nowadays, but it appears that he is doing so. I want you to listen to that and hear how Fox 5 actually feels about this endorsement from Woody Harrelson.
Brand becoming toxic. Here's the latest example of the party's intolerance. Liberals are going into a rage at Woody Harrelson after the actor wore an RFK Jr. presidential hat. Brian, they're very afraid of RFK. I mean, he's not going to win, but it's something about him that is annoying this party.
It's hard to.
And I also want to just add in here, that actually wasn't surprising for me in reference to Woody Harrelson. Woody Harrelson has always kind of been an out of the box kind of thinker, like a little quirky sometimes. Like he never, I don't know if they ever even listened to interviews with Woody Harrelson, but that actually was not surprising to me. But apparently, I guess a lot of liberals, and particularly those in Hollywood or whatever, they're like, no, you can't have this happen. Even Hollywood is controlled.
Dismiss a guy who's Robert, his name is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who was, I think, 13 years old when his dad was assassinated and stood right there. So you can't dismiss him and say he's some fringe Kennedy. Number two is Joe Rogan also really impressed with RFK Jr., who's got tremendous street cred.
Joe Rogan, the big Democrat, Joe Rogan.
Well, he voted for Bernie Sanders. But he's all over the place. I mean, the guy that said I'd never vote for Donald Trump now says I'll probably interview him. So Joe Rogan's power can't be underestimated. And then with Woody Harrelson's situation, that's one of the most likable guys you'll ever meet. Number two is he already shocked people with the SNL monologue. And number three is why can't he make his own decisions? We're past cancel culture. I'm telling you, we've turned the page. You're not going to cancel people because of who they support. I'm telling you, America has moved on. And good luck with trying to marginalize that guy. That guy can act, Woody Harrelson.
Let's come up out of here. So I wanted you to hear that. They go on to talk about like certain pandemic things that I can't play on here. But I wanted you to hear that because there is this need to try to control people, like to try to control, like whether it's actors or just people who are not in Hollywood as well, to try to tell you who you're supposed to support or who you're supposed to vote for. And the thing is I guess there seems to be this idea in Hollywood that if you're going to support someone politically, that you're automatically going to back the liberal establishment candidate. So most of the people in Hollywood would most likely be for Joe Biden. And I think there is that mentality there. So anyone who thinks outside of that bubble, they just kind of see you as, oh, what are you doing? You're going against the Hollywood standards. It's crazy. Like you can't like think for yourself. It's a cult. I told you it is a cult. Now, last thing I want to tell you about RFK Jr. For those of you who have been waiting for this, I know some of you have. He was recently in Iowa and he was questioned about whether or not he is going to have that discussion with Max Blumenthal. Listen to this. I think some of you might be glad to hear this. Let me put on captions because I think it's kind of okay.
About what?
About comments that you've made that you felt were...
Yeah, I've never made an anti-Semitic comment in my life. In fact, I'm also being, by the far left, I'm also, and by the mainstream media, I'm also at the same time being accused of being a Zionist. So, in fact, I'm debating Matt Blumenthal in a couple of weeks because he's complaining that I'm a Zionist. So it's pretty hard to justify, it's pretty hard to reconcile somebody being an anti-Semite and a Zionist. I've never made any anti-Semitic. I've never made any anti-Semitic, even a phrase in my entire life.
So I just wanted to play that piece there because he says that he's going to debate Max Blumenthal within, he said, the next couple of weeks. This was recent. This was August 12th. So that was just yesterday, or they posted this yesterday, at least in Des Moines. So just FYI, I don't know if Max knows this, but I'm sure he probably does, but if he doesn't, he probably does now. Or if he did, he probably does now. But he says that is supposed to happen in the next couple of weeks. We talked about this before, that his communications director had responded to Max and said that's not happening. But it appears that RFK is saying here on the record that that is going to happen in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that if that does happen. But yes, we've gone over like his stance on Israel, and you guys know where I stand on that. But yeah, so when it comes to the inflation and the economy, I think any political candidate at this point in time, it is a mistake if you are not focusing your campaign on the economy. You cannot just, is a huge mistake, And I already see, we'll get into that in a second. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric, because I'm going to tell you guys something in a second. People are already making that mistake. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Bingo, Sab, regarding cheap labor, but only to use them as scabs until the robots take over. This hurts the freedmen community the most. There's thinking that they come here to take jobs we refuse to take, but that's because we know our rights and withhold our labor to force benefits and wages up until the boss class relents. So long as they have scab migrant class willing to do the work, U.S. will keep invading. And thank you for this as well. Kitchen Table Politics talking about the monthly bills talk. Do people still do this? Sabby, he is not appealing to your generation. Tell me about it. Tell me about it. Sabby is not appealing to your generation. He's appealing to reliable voters, the seniors who ain't effing with internet like that. Sab, we need to get people away from thinking it is only inflation and remind them it is income inequality. It has been persistent regardless of whether we had inflation or not. You're right. Bingo. Let me go to some of the comments here in the chat. Thank you, Luca. Before the internet, we paid and organized bills at the kitchen table. It's a reference for people over 50. Okay, that makes sense. Joe says, my parents used to do it. Yeah, it's old. Peter, they are talking to the older generation because they are the only ones who vote. Baby Ethernet says that looked like a bank statement, not the bills. It's funny. Tia says, don't forget the stores in the poor areas with Black and Hispanic people have been caught price gouging. That's true. Thank you, M. People are spending all their food stamps at $1 Tree. Yeah, or Dollar Tree. Actually, I don't even think a Dollar Tree is only just $1 anymore, right? I think it's up a little more. Thank you, Chima. Vegetarianism and veganism went from being a necessity for peasants and poor workers to being a symbol of the PMC lifestyle, which leads to my point. Food should be for sustenance, not for profiteering. Well said, Chima. Well said. Okay, we're going into our final story. If you have not heard of Vivek Ramaswamy, you are going to get to know him a little bit now. Someone who started at the bottom of the polls for the GOP primary, polling at 0.0%, is now in third place. And whether you agree with his politics or not, this is someone that I think you should pay close attention to, because if he continues on this track, it is very possible that he could surpass Ron DeSantis. In this new 538 poll, you will see here that Trump is at 53.7%, DeSantis 14.3%, and Vivek Ramaswamy is now at 7.5%. That is insane, considering he was all the way at the bottom. So there is something that he is doing that has caused his sudden increase in the polls. Maybe it's the way he's speaking to the American people. Maybe it's the issues that he's addressing. Or maybe it's the fact that he is not a politician. He's a businessman. Does that sound familiar? We're going to get into this interview that Vivek had with Russell Brand. There's two parts I want to focus on here, so you'll get to see a little bit about him and who he is. What was really interesting to me when we look at his campaign, I'm really curious as to why he's not running as an independent. Because there are certain things that are part of his campaign. To me, I'm just kind of like, why not just run as an independent? There are certain issues when you look at his campaign where he actually seems a little bit similar to RFK Jr. when we talk about the FBI. We talk about like these government agencies. But let's hear it for yourself. Why is he running? And do you think that he actually could be a threat to Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump? Let's go in.
First 15 minutes of the conversation while we're on YouTube, we can keep things relatively light. Of course, over the course of our conversation, I'd love to talk to you about your views on Donald Trump and what he does to your candidacy and indeed anyone who would seek the nomination of the Republican Party. But let's start a little bit with some of the broader points for our audience who are not yet familiar with you. What exactly do you think you can bring to this race? What do you think you can bring to this candidacy? What do you think it's lacking?
So, look, I think that the thing that was missing in the field, the thing that pulled me in, is that I see a Republican Party that for a long time has been running from something. I am leading us to start running to something, to our vision of what it means to be an American, to the ideals of the American Revolution that define what this country is all about. And yes, the left is very good at filling the vacuum of purpose and meaning in young people with race, gender, sexuality, climate. I want us talking more about what we actually stand for: the individual, the family, the nation, God.
Who's God? What do we stand for? See, this is the thing, when you start bringing in things like, the nation, the individual, family, God. Who's God? We don't all have the same religion. Some people aren't religious at all. When I hear the individual, that reminds me, are you talking about capitalism? What are they? What does America stand for? I don't think it's that easy to define. America is a melting pot. We have people from all over the world. So I don't know. I don't know. That sounds to me, it sounds a little cheesy.
This is, I think, actually much more valuable than just criticizing and playing whack-a-mole with everything the other side gives us. And I bring some unique attributes to this. I'm not a politician. I'm a businessman. I have lived the American dream. My parents came to this country with no money.
But his parents were professionals. I have to add this in here because I've seen him say this multiple times, that his parents came here with no money. I've heard this over and over again, that while that may be true, I pulled up the info and I showed you guys before that his parents, though, it's not like your parents are doctors. One's an engineer, a patent engineer, and a doctor. It's not like they weren't PMC. They were PMC. So it's easier to achieve the American dream when you're already coming from a position of wealth to begin with. It's easier to achieve the American dream when you already have parents who are educated enough and have those positions to be able to put you through college and have you achieve that same success or even greater. I want to hear from someone who knows what it's like to be poor. So it's easier to achieve the American dream when you already have a wealth net set up for you. Yes, it is easier. So this is not no pull up the bootstraps. He didn't have to pull anything up. That's the point I want to bring across to you. Let's continue.
I have gone on to found multi-billion-dollar companies. I did it while getting married to my wife, Apurva, raising 2 sons. That's the American dream. It's not a politician's story. And I think it might just take somebody of a different generation to get this job done and actually reaching young Americans, bringing them along, reminding them why we have to be proud of this country, all the reasons we have to be proud of this nation we call home. And you know what? That's a unique combination. Somebody who both comes from the business world, but understands the Constitution deeply. Somebody who cares about this country, but who has also succeeded in living the American dream and who is young and a member of my generation. That's what I'm bringing to this that I think nobody else is. It is what gave me the duty to, I think, it called me into this race, and we will see what God's plan is for us. But for now, we're going to keep doing what I believe is my part, and my heart says we're going to be successful.
Fearless J says on.
What I don't want for people to take away from this, and this is my fear with someone like him running, I'm afraid that people are going to hear his message and they're going to assume that they can too. Oh, if he did it, I can achieve the American dream too. When he's leaving out certain pieces that I think is important for people to know. He's corporate. And it's not like he did not come from some type of wealth background. And I can pull that up for you in a second as well. I don't want people, I've seen this story so many times where someone is running for office and they say, my parents came here with no money in their pocket. First of all, how you get here with no money? If you flew on a plane, if you came on a boat or whatever, you got here somehow. You paid somebody to get here for the transportation, okay? So they kill me when they say they came here with no money in their pocket and they were able to make it. But he leaves out important pieces. You're leaving out the degrees. You're leaving out the college education. Like, so miss me with all of that. Miss me with all that. Remember, he's a businessman, so he can be a good salesman.
Locals. Now we need more senile octogenarians in power. I think that's some tacit support right there. Now you're currently third in the polls. We had Ron DeSantis, the governor, on our show recently, and I get the sense that it must be difficult to find yourself in this position when the conversation is continually dominated by Donald Trump, his easy oratical brilliance, his status as the perennial outsider, although I recognize that you have a comparable background in enterprise and business. How do you tackle the challenges that that Donald Trump's candidacy continues to represent? In a second, once we leave YouTube, which is just in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask you outright, do you believe...
We'll have to skip that part. Sorry. I know there's one part where... Okay, here we go.
Take the America First agenda to the next level. And I'm not blaming him for this. I think it's just a fact that about 30% of this country, probably 30% of the developed world, becomes psychiatrically ill when he is in the White House. And I can't explain it to you because I think a lot of what he did makes total sense to me. In fact, I'm saying many of the same things. In some cases, I'm going far further than he ever did. I've said I would use the military on our southern border. I've said I would shut down departments like the U.S. Department of Education, where he appointed figureheads to try to reform them. So in some ways, it's funny that I'm going further than he is, in some cases saying the exact same things.
He would shut down the Department of Education, but he already got his education. You see how this works? Because he went to Harvard. I'm going to pull it up. He went to Harvard. So he could shut down the Department of Education, but he already got his. Let's continue.
But for whatever reason, maybe it's my age, maybe it's my background, maybe it's the way I say them, I'm not having that effect on people. And that will allow me to go further than Trump did, while also, I think, having the last best chance we have of uniting this country. And you know what? That gives me a sense of enthusiasm and excitement. A lot of people want me to sit here and bash Trump. I'm not going to do that. I respect him. I think he was a great president. I just want to build on that foundation to go further. And I'm pretty happy. I think other candidates might be frustrated. For me, I'm in a different seat. I was at not 0%. I was at 0.0% in March, which is not that long ago when I got into this race. I'm now polling the third.
You guys see what he's doing? So unlike some of his competitors in the GOP primary, he is not criticizing Donald Trump the way that they are. He's not attacking him the way that Ron DeSantis is. He's basically just saying he wants to build on what Donald Trump did. And that, in its sense, that makes me think like maybe some of Trump's base who may be trying to look a different way, but not really feeling Ron DeSantis, maybe they may look at someone like Vivek and say, well, he's not criticizing Donald Trump, but he wants to do a little bit more. Maybe he's able to get some of those people. So if we're talking about strategy, that was actually pretty smart.
In the Republican primary, we haven't even had the first debate yet. So I'm actually pretty happy with how things are going. I'm on the same trajectory that Trump was in 2015. And in many ways, I'm more similar to Trump in 2015 than Trump today is to Trump in 2015. And I think that's exactly why we're going to win this election, probably in a landslide. And I think that's going to be the single most uniting event for this country.
Vivek,
why does he remind me? You know who he reminds me of? Different policies, of course. But you know who he reminds me of when I listen to him speak? He reminds me of Barack Obama. All of this, unite the country, bring everybody together. We need to go a step further. Listen to him. We're going to go to another clip because they get into the more the Trump stuff there. We're going to go to another clip. I want you to pay close attention to what he's saying. Younger, energetic kind of dude, just like Obama was. He was younger, at that point in time when he ran, trying to grasp the younger people and things like that. That's who he reminds me of. Let's go in, and then I'm going to show you about where he really comes from. Listen to this.
Where do you think free speech stands in your country, Vivek, at the moment? And what would you do to address this issue?
Well, in 1776, and in principle, free speech is the most important bedrock principle of the United States. The idea that whoever you are, whatever your views are, whatever your opinions are, you get to express them as long as I get to express mine in return. That was the bargain of the American Revolution. This is a radical idea. For most of human history, in old world Europe and in England, it was done the other way. They said that
he really reminds me, even his mannerisms, he really reminds me of Barack Obama. But they're talking about censorship and free speech here, this is something where he does agree with RFK Jr. Then also the issue about the FBI and government agencies, he agrees with him about that as well. That's why I said some of these lines kind of blur. There was also a video on Twitter, I forgot to link it, but there was a video on Twitter where he said, we need to not focus on red versus blue, but he's running in the Republican Party. So to me, it was just kind of like, why aren't you running as an independent?
the people cannot be trusted to speak their minds. In fact, we, the government, cannot trust the people with the truth. We have to tell them noble lies. And if they criticize us for us, they must be suppressed, because that's what's required to preserve order and structure in a society. In the United States of America in 1776, we fought a revolution to say it's done the other way. I am sad to say, Russell, that that's not the America that I live in today. The America that I live in today is one where the government deputizes private companies to do through the back door what the government could not do through the front door under the Constitution. Indeed, that is why we are unable right now to have this conversation on YouTube. That is pathetic. That is shameful. That is a hollowed out husk of the country that I grew up in. If George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton were walking the streets of this country today, they would not be proud. They would be appalled.
If they were walking the streets of this country today, you would not be in the position you in right now, because they would have had you be one of their servants. I'm so tired of the people going back to the founding fathers and let's go back to the history of this country and what this country was built on. Violence and mayhem. Let's stop talking about the founding fathers like they were something we should look up to. Let's keep it real.
At seeing a country that looks more like the kingdom they declared independence from than the country they actually set into motion. And you know what my job is? When I leave office in January 2033, right, I'll be 47, 48 years old. Twice the age Thomas Jefferson was, by the way, when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. People forget that. My son will be just entering high school. Young Americans will once again be proud of those radical ideals we used to set this country into motion, rather than being ashamed of them. Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington will once again rest in peace.
Thomas Jefferson was a racist. Oh my God, man. Did you know these people will care nothing about you, man? Nothing about you. They would care nothing about you.
But the only way we're going to get there, the first step we're going to have to take to get there, is to restore the First Amendment itself. And it's in the First Amendment for a reason. We have absolute free speech in this country. There's no opinion that you should not be able to express. That's what absolute free speech means. Doesn't mean you can fraudulently lie to somebody and sell them a product for private gain. Doesn't mean that you can threaten somebody and then follow through on that threat. No, those aren't opinions. But free speech above all, if it means one thing, it means that all opinions are fair game, and any criticism of the government is also fair game. And yet that's exactly what the government is clamping down on today. And that's exactly what I will restore as the next president.
Free speech for who? Because you see, one of the things that I've noticed when we talk about free speech, and not everyone, but some people, when they champion, they say we need to have free speech. And I agree, we do need to have free speech. It's kind of funny, though, because some of the things that Vivek talks about on his campaign trail is actually not in support of free speech. When he talks about the rhetoric, when he talks about the woke rhetoric, that's not in agreement with free speech. Shouldn't those people have the right to say that too, whether you agree with it or not? So what free speech are we talking about? Because free speech means different things to different people. And I've started to know this. Some people are like, free speech means they should be able to say whatever they want to on social media. They should not be penalized. People should not be deplatformed, yada, yada. But at the same time, some of those same people will want to cancel or will ask social media platforms to cancel certain people who say things that they disagree with. So is it free speech absolutism? Or is it free speech in reference to what you favor and what you agree with? Just something to think about. And I think we have one more piece here.
How do you believe you could transfer those ideals into office when you have agencies like the FBI that have undue, immersive, and ubiquitous power? I'd like to draw to your attention, if I may, Vivek, the case of the Newburgh Four, who recently had their convictions overturned, or at least were granted compassionate release, after it was revealed, if not publicly proven, that their convictions were based on FBI meddling, that essentially the FBI built a conspiracy, cast them in that conspiracy, in this instance, an act of terror, bombings against synagogues, solely that they could arrest these men for that crime. Now, they've subsequently been released. When we turn our attention to the events of January 6th, where we know that the FBI had operatives and agents within that crowd, how can we be certain that the FBI were not participating in exaggerating, amplifying, and encouraging the events that are now subject to so much scrutiny and controversy to this day? And indeed, does this not indicate that along with big tech, agencies like the FBI and the CIA, who deeply penetrated big tech organizations and participated in the manipulation that you earlier described, will still have power? What would you do to limit the power of the FBI and the CIA and deep state agencies elsewhere and bureaucratic bodies that throughout the COVID pandemic period behaved atrociously? What would you do to limit that power? And if you have time to comment on the particular case of the Newburgh Four, I'd be interested in what you think about that and how it pertains to January 6th. Was January 6th an insurrection?
Well, we got to pause here. I'm sorry. Russell Brand has really long questions. But what he's basically saying is, what would you do in reference to the
I think
FBI?
you just scratched the surface. This is just part of a broader pattern. I'm going to answer your question. Before I do, I want people to know this is not a partisan answer. And the reason I'll tell you it's not a partisan answer is the examples you gave, Russell, are solid examples grounded in appropriate skepticism and fact. But they will say, no, that's just conservative grievance. So let me just give you even further back. The same FBI that will not tell us how many field agents, likely hundreds, if I have to guess, were on the ground on January 6th, is the same FBI that lied to us directly to the face of the people about what happened on 9/11. You think this is third rail stuff? Probably YouTube wouldn't allow this either.
Yep, and we're going to move on from that. I think this is
down that FBI. I've offered unprecedented detail on the legal authority that who would have ever thought The president of the United States, who runs the executive branch of the government, can actually run the executive branch of the government. Radical idea. Turns out it's grounded in the law and the Constitution. I've also laid out the exact plan. I don't want people to suffer for risk of drugs or child trafficking. There's 35,000 employees in the FBI. 20,000 of them are not on the front lines. They sit in the J. Edgar Hoover building at the FBI. That's where the political rot begins. Those people will have to go home and find honest work in the private sector. The 15,000 or so agents who are on the front lines, we will redeploy them at the U.S. Marshals, a separate agency that has not yet been corrupted. They've been very good at child sex trafficking cases in bringing those much more effectively than the FBI has. Put them there. Put them in the Drug Enforcement Agency, which has been much more effective in fighting the fentanyl spread in this country. Put them in the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, tackling complex white-collar crime and theft. So this is deeply practical, actually. The FBI, part of the point is it was redundant when it was created. It is redundant today. And when you have redundant bureaucracies, that's actually the formula for systematic corruption, which is exactly what we see. And Russell, I think that gets to the heart of the choice in this GOP primary. There's absolutely a choice that voters will have to make. Do they want incremental reform, or do they want revolution? I stand on the side of revolution, the American Revolution. If you want incremental reform, go with somebody else.
So I wanted everybody to hear that. I wanted everybody to hear what he just said there. So he's not in favor of the FBI. And this goes into another piece here. I just want to bring this up. We can come back to this in just a second. But he's letting you know, if you want incrementalism, you need to go with someone else. He's on the side of revolution. He's running through the Republican Party. Why don't we have anybody running through the Democratic Party that's willing to say they're on the side of revolution? And I'm not talking about no Bernie Sanders political revolution. Why don't we have anybody doing that? Think about that for a second. Now, in reference to, I don't know what happened there. Oh, let me go back to that. I'm sorry. I thought that was ready, but it's not up here. Hold on. Uh-oh. I'll come back to it. There's a link missing. Anyway, let me let him finish and then we'll come back. Sorry about that. Whoopsie-doo.
If you want a quantum leap to revolution, that's what I'm actually bringing. Not violent revolution, but a revival of the ideals of the American Revolution. Yes, radical ideals that in 1776 gave birth to this nation. I stand for the radicalism of the American Revolution. And that's very different than the other candidates in this race.
And maybe that's why he's now in third place. Now, another thing that he brought up, and some of you are going to laugh at this one. He believes in civic duty voting. Now, this is a little bit different. I want to read this piece right here. He said that the U.S. faces a 25% recruitment deficit in the military, and just 16% of Gen Z say they're proud to be an American. The absence of national pride is a serious threat to our republic's survival. At a time when young Americans are taught to celebrate their differences, civic duty voting, and in particular the service path, creates a sense of shared purpose and experience. Like military recruitment deficit should continue. Young people shouldn't have to sign up to join the military. We should be ending these wars and not encouraging people to get involved in them. Now, when you click on civic duty voting here, this is the piece I want you to see. He believes this is what he wants to do. Vivek supports a constitutional amendment to implement civic duty voting among Americans aged 18 to 25. In substance, this amendment will increase the standard voting age to 25, while still allowing all Americans to vote at age 18 if they meet a national service requirement, at least 6 months in the military or a first responder role, or pass the same civics tests required of naturalized citizens. The fuck? No. Like, it's just, here he is basically trying to help increase military recruitment. That's clown shit. Like, no. If people want to join, they'll join. You see that? So You're old enough at 18 to join the military and go fight these wars. But if you want to vote at 18, you either need to pass this civics test that he said is required for naturalized citizens, or you need to meet that national service requirement where you have to do at least 6 months in the military. Sounds like a backdoor draft. It goes on to say voting will remain open to citizens starting from the age of 18 who are U.S. and have demonstrated civic information in at least one of several ways: direct service in the country, in the military or first responding service, police, fire, etc. Now you trying to help out the police state. Passed a civics test identical to the U.S. citizenship exam for naturalized citizens, or reach the age of 25. The other two are less likely to happen. People who are 18 are probably going to be less likely to take this test, and they're going to be less likely to join the military since they're less likely to join it now, which means what he's really trying to do is push the voting age overall to 25. Vivek, he's out here rapping Eminem. I don't know how to take this dude. Vivek Ramaswamy raps Eminem's "Lose Yourself" at the Iowa State Fair. I can't play it because of the music, but here it is. I told you he reminds me of Barack Obama. I'm not kidding. We've seen this before. What is this? Now on to the fam, because I told you he likes to tell this story about coming from, they came here with nothing in their pocket. Let's talk about the pockets. So if all you got to do is Google him. Let's go to the family. I'm going to show you what they came here with, okay? Look at this. He was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, to Indian Hindu immigrant parents who was raised in Ohio. Okay, this part right here, when we get to the employment, because I want you to understand, it's not like he came from working class. His father, V.G. Ramaswamy, a graduate of the National Institute of Technology, Calicut. Okay, so he already had the degrees needed. Let me continue. Worked as an engineer and a patent attorney for General Electric, while his mother, Geetha Ramaswamy, a graduate of the Mysore Medical College and Research Institute, worked as a geriatric psychiatrist. Doctors and engineers. So the next time you hear him say, my parents came here with nothing in their pocket, make sure you say they came here with degrees, bitch. They came here with degrees and they were ready to roll, okay? It's not like you came here working class. Sorries. There's one more thing I do want to show you as well. I want to make sure I don't forget this. But I thought I had in the clip. Or Eric, if you can go back to the first screen, because there's another link there, unless I have to. Thank you. Eric's going to go back to that first type VNC. It's at the bottom, federal jobs. I want you to see this one, right? Now, here's another strategy. It's different. This strategy is mad different. And I know people are already starting to criticize it, but I want to explain to you why this may actually not hurt him. Check this out. We talking about the federal jobs. So listen to this. Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy says he'll cut 75% of the federal employee workforce. Now, some people saw this and was like, is he crazy? Is he trying to lose or is he trying to win? Right? Let's think about this. Where do the majority of federal employees work? Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia. As a GOP candidate, he wouldn't win those places anyway. He wouldn't win Maryland. He wouldn't win Virginia. Probably wouldn't win Virginia. It'd be hard to win Virginia now as a Republican. Wouldn't win Virginia, and he wouldn't win D.C. D.C.'s hardcore blue. Maryland is hardcore blue. Virginia is more of a Carolina blue, a lighter blue. But he wouldn't win those. The DMV. So if that's something he really wants to do, cut 75% of the federal employee workforce, that also includes the FBI, which he mentioned in the Russell Brand interview, that he wanted to get rid of those FBI agents, the 20,000 something that are just sitting in the building, and they're going to have to go get jobs in the private sector. I don't know. Different strategy, different campaign. I think he should be running as an independent, but he probably wouldn't get the type of attention that he's getting if he was running as an independent. But he kind of seemed all over the place. But he reminds me of Barack Obama. And that should scare a lot of you. That should scare a lot of you guys. I can interview him if you want. And I would tell him that. You remind me of Barack Obama. I've seen this before, boo. Let me take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. All right. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. He said the individual and family, but not the community or workers. He is against reparations and uses the meritocracy argument against it, railing against affirmative action. So let's press him. Okay, merit system. Let's ask, will you end not only legacy admission, but inherited wealth as well? I mean, the heirs didn't earn that wealth. Vivek, hate to tell you, kissing up to Trump won't save you from Trump. Dun, 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 dun. Thank you for this as well. Sab, American people won't fall for this line of, hey, if he made it, then maybe I can too. We've already been through that, and this is where we ended up. Have faith every time you say that youngins come through. Also, people like Vivek think that the government is not supposed to help us. They ignore the first enumerated power in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, financing the general welfare. Preamble promotes it. And thanks for this as well. Sab, in case no one knows, the U.S. Constitution is amended by 290 House 66 U.S. senators, passed a resolution, then sent to the states. Once both state legislatures of 34 states ratify it, then it gets archived at the archivist. An amendment is done. The other way is 34 states agree on a subject, then 38 ratify. Presidents can use bully bullpit, but other than that, they aren't involved in the process. And I'll go to the comments here. Thank you. Whoops, I didn't start from the top. Sorry about that. Sean says he's a good candidate, won't win, but a good candidate. Interesting. Dwayne says DeSantis' anti-woke message can't carry a campaign. He keeps sinking in the polls. Thank you, American. Vivek is speaking the language of American exceptionalism to white America. This is the same drivel RFK Jr. spouts that doesn't apply to all Americans. Frank, people talking about the American dream scare me. I know, right? Thank you for this as well. Wow, he needs to stop talking. And thank you, American. People like Vivek are the reason why Black Americans are becoming so anti-immigration. There can be no unity or solidarity until this is addressed. JB, and just for $19.99, you too can buy this big, beautiful free speech. So vote for me for this low, low price. Aisha, thank you. He doesn't sound like just anyone who had to work for what they have. He sounds self-absorbed and out of touch with the rest of us. Another Obama. Yeah. Thank you, Frank. Someone needs to tell him about this country. Thank you, Leprechaun Ally. Sabrina, I can't help myself. Vivek and Obama are both Leos. Year of the Buffalo. Nailed it with God, too. I almost fell out of my chair. You're such a beacon and so connected. Oh, thank you, Leprechaun. And thank you, Daniel. Check out his graduation speech from high school. He's always well-spoken. Also, he's against legacy admissions and wants to end war. Interesting, Daniel. I don't know why I said it like that, Daniel. I'm sorry. And thank you, Roger. PO, biggest Fed employer, +4 black peeps also, the post office. Thank you. Okie dokes. That's it, guys. I'm out. I think Due Dissidence is live now. Have a good Sunday evening. I'm heading out. If you're looking for something to watch later, after you hop over to Due Dissidence, most of you usually go over there. Painkiller is on Netflix. It's about what's happened with Oxycontin. Great bio series so far. I haven't finished it yet, but it's really good. Check it out. I'm out of here. Have a good night. Oh, Matt Taibbi will be here Tuesday night, I believe. I'll double check, but I'll let you guys know. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.